Hi, everyone, and welcome to News Take. I'm Rebecca Frank, VP of Research and Insights at the News Media Alliance. For those of you joining us for the first time, News Take conversations are designed to dive deep into topics shaping the publishing industry. And today I am overjoyed to get the perspective of someone whose career has bridged both the magazine and news publishing worlds. My guest, Lisa Hughes, is publisher and CEO of the Philadelphia Inquirer and is the first female publisher in the company's history. She's served on the Inquirer's board of directors since 2018. Throughout her career, she has launched, built, and transformed media brands, including The New Yorker, Condé Nast, Traveler, and Vanity Fair. Before joining the Inquirer, she served as Chief Business Officer of The New Yorker and publisher of Condé Nast Traveler. And of course, we couldn't forget to mention that Lisa serves on the board of the News Media Alliance. So thank you so much for joining us, Lisa.
Well, it's an honor to be here.
Great. So first, I'd love to know about your career path and how you got here and where you began.
You know, it's a conversation I'm having a lot because I have two college-age children. One just graduated, one's about to graduate. So this is a lot of conversations about how do you start in your career, with their friends. And, it really wasn't anything more profound than I love to read. I love magazines. I love, I grew up reading the New York Times, the Greenwich Time. I grew up in Connecticut, and I love books. And so I really wanted to be part of that industry. I wasn't a talented enough writer, so I had to figure out, okay, how do I be around these people and this thing that I love, the thing that moves people, which is the written word, and figured out I had a path on the business side. And so I started in book publishing and, kept trying to get a job there, but they kept making me take a typing test. They didn't make the men do this. They only made the women do this. And of course, this is the 80s. And when I graduated from college, and I kept failing the typing test. I can type, but I cheat. You couldn't look. And, I make mistakes when I don't look. So I did not get a job or an offer or even pass the first round in book publishing and moved on to magazines. My very first job was Cook's Magazine, now called America's Test Kitchen, and where I met the very young Chris Kimball, who was, I think, 28 at the time.
Oh, my goodness.
And he offered me the job in the interview, which, I didn't know any better that doesn't actually happen in your first interview. And it was a great entry into the magazine world. I started in ad sales, and then I ended up, as you mentioned, as publisher of The New Yorker. I joined the Inquirer board in 2018, and then from that role was recruited to take over as publisher of the Inquirer. And it's been an incredible journey and a great 3 years so far.
Yeah, and a busy 3 years.
Yeah.
But what a story from Cook's all the way to the New Yorker and now to the Inquirer. So, as we all well know, the news industry has been significantly impacted by consumers' shift to digital information access over, we'll call it the past 20 years, but you can certainly broaden it. But for those of our listeners who came from the news side, can you talk about what that transition looked like for magazines? What unique challenges did you observe there?
Yeah. Well, magazines were disrupted by advertisers and consumers moving to digital platforms in the same way that newspapers were. So we experienced many of the same issues, and the same issues played out, but magazines were even more reliant on advertising revenue as a percentage of the revenue pie than newspapers. So, they were hit particularly hard. Most magazines had very, very little consumer revenue. And in fact, underpriced the subscription in order to raise rate base, which is what ad rates were pegged to. So, you had, great magazines that were $15 a year, let's say, $12 a year, Vogue, many. Now, there, of course, were a few exceptions. People magazine famously had a very, very strong ad business, of course, still does. But a very, very strong consumer business because they were at, $150 a year or whatever. And then, of course, the real role model was The Economist, who always had a much stronger consumer business than they had ad business, and they led the way. And that was really our model when I was at the New Yorker. And in my time there, we successfully flipped the business from an ad revenue-based business to a consumer revenue-based business, which was the key flip and the decision that saved the business. Yeah. Not every magazine can do that. Your content has to be really differentiated and coveted.
Well, and that's such a perfect example, right? So many publications would dream to be in that position so they could make that transition, but also to know that and to understand the value of that differentiated content. Mm-hmm. A little bit more on your work at Condé Nast. While you were there, you were involved in multiple brand launches. Mm-hmm. And I'd love to talk about those a bit, because I think those kinds of new product launches and spin-offs and innovations it's something a lot of companies want to do. How do you think about plan for a new product launch, and what would you call the keys to success for them?
Yeah. Well, yes, I had the great good fortune of working on incredible iconic brands that were either launching anew, like Allure, or relaunching, like Vanity Fair. Mm-hmm. When I was at Vanity Fair, I came in just as Graydon Carter had taken over from Tina Brown, who was a very big Deal Star editor, well known in the ad community. Graydon was an unknown at that point, and a magazine like Vanity Fair was very much a vision of the editor. So the advertising community was absolutely freaking out over this change. And of course, it's an ad-based business at this point. And so, you really have to think about how are we going to reassure the ad community, and that's with innovation and coming up with something new. And Graydon's idea, which was the winning idea, was the Hollywood issue, which has become a franchise for Vanity Fair.
Yeah.
But the Hollywood issue, where he did for the very first time that triple gatefold with the Annie Leibovitz photograph of the most important actresses of the time on the first panel, and then the up and comers on panel 2 and 3, and we sold a 4-page gatefold to Tommy Hilfiger. And, hundreds of pages of advertising, because you're really marketing it as a new product and this thing that's, going to be so meaningful to Hollywood. So you have to have a vision. You have to get out there and market it. And we knew the second it hit that, and it was a big fat issue and folioed, I think, over 400 pages or something, that it would signal that the brand was back. And it did. It was overnight. And I'll never forget, because one of the actresses on panel 2 or 3, that was the up-and-comer unknown, with the entire sales staff, we had to practice saying her name, which was Gwyneth Paltrow. Gwyneth Paltrow. And we had such trouble remembering this person that no one had heard of. And, it's kind of fun. But, so I think it's having a big idea to reboot and get people to look at you anew, to answer your question and sort of say, wow, there's something new going on here. And of course, I think in newspapers, that's newsletter strategy, that's top of funnel strategy, which is, how do I get someone to look at you? They have a preconceived notion. How do we get you to look at you anew and say, wow, there's more here than I thought? And that's the game. I was on the team with Linda Wells that launched Allure from the ground floor up. And that's the other piece, which is you borrow your equity. We could say from the publishers of Vogue, we are bringing you something new, a magazine that's all about beauty. And you have credibility. So that flanker brand strategy, in the same way the Times, was able to really lean into the food app and make that a real business. Or Wirecutter is a great example, that flanker brand strategy. They had permission. They brought the DNA of the brand to the market with a relevant extension of their brand. And of course, those 2 examples have been winners.
Yeah. So you've launched the Vanity Fair Hollywood issue. You've launched magazines from the brand up. 2018, you join the Inquirer board, and they ask you to come on as the CEO. You make this transition from magazines to news. What surprised you? I imagine you had some expectations. What which ones weren't met and which ones, and how were you surprised?
It's such a good question. In many ways, the transition wasn't as dramatic as one would think because, of course, I was coming from the New Yorker. So that
Right.
is a daily, web business and a weekly magazine. But I'll back it up to say sort of the value proposition was the same, journalistic integrity, fact-based reporting, accuracy, understanding the deep mission with the reader. Those are all through lines for me. So that wasn't any different. I think the metabolism, the 24/7 metabolism of a newsroom, the news report is different than magazines for sure. You just have to move and go, and you can't have perfect be the enemy of good. You've got to go, you got to move. And, of course, the whole breaking news and being in the moment and, a piece of the newsroom is really key. So it wasn't as big a transition as I thought. It was the first time I'd worked with a union shop, so that was new to me, and an important learning curve.
Sure.
And also how deeply important the newspaper is, the institution is to Philly.
Yeah.
It is. We punch way above our weight. We are in all of the corridors of power, from the governor to the mayor to CEOs to cultural heads. It matters what we write, and that responsibility is really something you have to take seriously.
Yeah.
And what you say, what we produce, the accuracy, the fact-based reporting, it really, really matters. So, there's a lot more pressure there to get that right, to correct, and to really appreciate the power that we have. So, I think that was something that I had to really understand deeply.
Yeah. And then, of course, specifically, you started your role in early 2020, a time that looked nothing like the year that followed. So, you spent the bulk of your first year on the job navigating that truly uncharted territory, but also experimenting with a lot of new formats and ways of communicating this brand to people. So talk a little bit, if you can, go back to that moment and talk about what that was like.
Yeah, I started, you're right, in February 2020. So I was in the job maybe 4 weeks live in person.
My goodness.
And then we all went home. And so, it forced us to get really, really focused on how do we do our work physically? How do we do our work? How do we keep, producing the news report every day, digitally, in print, getting papers to people? How do we keep our employees safe? So those are all simultaneous conversations. It's not sequence. It's all, how do we keep our employees safe? How do we keep doing the work that we do? We didn't miss a day. How do we keep Philly informed? Because going back to the answer I gave you just now, keeping Philly informed is it's not just a frivolous thing. It is a really, really important thing, and our mission and mission critical. And how do we communicate with each other now that we're all dispersed and remote? So what's the saying? Necessity is the mother of invention. That was the birth of our live blog, which we started with a coronavirus live blog because people needed to know in real time. And that's been going ever since on any number of very important issues that people want to follow along in real time. From our, we have our 100th mayoral election with a very big field of folks running for that office, which is coming, the election's coming up in May. We've got, an Eagles championship run that we just finished. And so, that live blog was an innovation that happened then for us. It was new and has just been an incredibly important part of our business now that we will continue. Another thing that happened in the middle of all of this was, of course, we were roiling as a city in the wake of George Floyd's murder. We had our own chapter in terms of Our Racist Headline, and really a much needed reckoning in how we approach our work the content, how we engage with community. And out of that work, which we called Inquirer for All, we set up workflows looking at content, sourcing, voice, process. One of the recommendations that we have stood up this year is the Community News Desk, which is now run by Sabrina Vervulius, a 6-person desk that really engages anew with communities that have been traditionally underserved or ignored by the Inquirer. And, that is not only is a body of work being produced by that group of journalists, but it's also informing the work across the whole newsroom. So that's another example of something that came out of this time, and I think we're the better for it.
So super quiet, not a lot of upheaval, very easy transition. Those first 90 days, just very smooth sailing is what I'm hearing.
Yeah. Business as usual, BAU.
BAU, exactly. No, and it's so interesting to hear about, those changes that you've made, sort of meeting people where they are, but also meeting the moment, building out the community news desk, and hopefully you're seeing that the community is responding, right? That they're seeing that you've listened, they're listening back, and it's much more of a dialogue.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's, certainly always more work to be done. We want to get better and better at it, but you're absolutely right.
Yeah. Just continuing to build that credibility. So, and of course the other challenge on top of everything that's happening, that's impacting how you do your work. But of course, we're in a time where there are so many more calls on people's time, ways of attracting attention, whether it's, the endless scroll of TikTok or the constant just generating content of something like YouTube. It's increasingly difficult to catch and keep attention. Can you talk about how publishers, you've worked again on both sides of magazines and news to attract audiences with all different kinds of content. How can publishers, be better, continue to improve to get better?
Yeah. Well, you're absolutely right, which is our competition is not, another news outlet in Philadelphia. Mm-hmm. Our competition is the 24-hour clock. It's Netflix, it's YouTube, it's scrolling through Instagram and getting caught in Springer Spaniel videos like I do. Springer Spaniel obsessed. So you're absolutely right, which is how are you going to break through in someone's day so that they feel compelled to read your content and further compelled to pay for that content.
Right, of course.
So we think about this in terms of our content strategy in the newsroom, to be 3 things, which is useful, revealing, and responsive. So we want always our content to be those things. So that's kind of the lens that we look through what we produce. I think it's about, you said it, meeting people where they are, and that's, something we all think about a lot. So newsletters, a strategy that we all employ, they're very effective because it allows people, for free to sample your content. You can do pop-up newsletters. You can do, the morning newsletter, the headline newsletter. We have a newsletter on the mayoral race, for example, that just lives for a certain moment. But it allows people to come in, start to sample, see your content, build habit, build stickiness, and then hopefully they go through that purchase funnel. We just launched a podcast called Uncovering the Birds, which is our, one of our franchises, of course, is sports because we have just the best fan base on the an incredibly vibrant and exciting sports town. And of course, we've got a sports desk that's been in every locker room, every front office for as longer than the teams have been around. So reporter Jeff McClain has been, covering the Eagles for 15 years and been all those conversations. So we just launched a weekly podcast with him called Uncovering the Birds, where he tells kind of those untold inside stories. And that gave us a new product to bring to advertisers. Wawa is our launch sponsor. So that was super exciting and right on brand and message for them as a big Eagles sponsor. And it also, allows us to push out to a new audience or, a rallying cry for Phillies, denizens who live in California and anywhere else. So, it's things like that. It's also, we experiment with a lot of, gamified content. So, everybody knows the NCAA bracket. We did the cheesesteak bracket, which was really fun and playful and got huge amount of traffic and audience and engagement. You've heard of Wordle. We did Birdle during the Super Bowl. Again, fun, very Philly, gamified, just engaging, and then hopefully someone comes in and says, wow, there's more food content than I thought there was, or this is really fun and engaging, or, and then they might read an investigative piece or something else, and then eventually say, okay, I'm reading enough of this content. I want to subscribe. Yeah. So that's our hope. You got to try new things. We're looking at TikTok. What's our strategy there? What makes sense? Test, learn, don't be afraid.
Yeah. I mean, it's so clear too, just based on those examples, as well as, the stories from within Condé Nast, that I think so many people could learn from. You understand, and working with your teams, understanding who it is that your audience is, right? That's so key. But also, what can the Philadelphia Inquirer do? Can bring that legitimacy to, right? That is in, as you say, the DNA of what the paper is, as well as who the readers are. So,
well, we're 193 years old this year, so we have been around, almost as long as Philly, and as I said, longer than all the sports teams. So, again, we are Philly. We are as much a part of the fabric of Philly as any institution is. So how do you bring that Philliness, that sense of humor, that irreverence, that energy that is so distinctive in Philly? We do
know. We've all seen it. But I think that what's so interesting too is that it's an understanding that the Inquirer is serious, but is able to have fun. I think that's a balance that not everyone is necessarily comfortable striking, but is valuable. It's honest,
Yes. Well, we have a lot to work with. I mean, Philly is a fabulous city and has great personality, as the old, founding of our country has, such a rich history. Obviously we have incredible universities, and so education, medical community, healthcare, and then, as I said, an incredible food town, incredible sports town. So we have, fortunately, a lot to work with.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if there's anything to take away, it's that who knows what's going on in a community better than an organization that's been covering it. Maybe not everyone is 193 years old, but these institutions, if you're a legacy publication, lean on your legacy, right?
Absolutely.
Your legacy is a key component, and it's part of who you are, and people love, and it's part of what you do, and people love that.
Definitely.
So from talking about your legacy, let's shift gears really hard, and let's talk about the changes that are coming. There's obviously, it's, as we look at now, the changes, AI, chatbots, the most recent of these potential earth shatterers. What are you specifically at the Inquirer? What are you looking at, and how do you see some of these developments changing what you do, if at all?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we are always looking at how we can harness new tech. The gamified example I just gave of gamifying content, but AI is a generative AI is a pretty profound and interesting opportunity now, and how do we use that to our advantage? And how do we protect ourselves and our audiences from misinformation that comes along with it? So, it's complex. We could see chatbots and generative AI bolstering our, call center customer service. And, you're seeing this already in great use with the airline industry, a lot of retail. We can get better there and take more advantage there. So we're excited to do that work, in particular this year. But we could also see applications for, say, high school sports scores and things like that. So, we are looking at it to say, okay, how does this make sense? The AP's using it, CNN's using it. How might those lessons inform how we might use it? And then also, how do you avoid the confusion on what's real and what's not? How do you protect the readership? And those are conversations we're continuing to have. And I don't know that we have to be the lead on this. And that's where, being a member of the News Media Alliance and really talking to our peers and talking to some of the bigger players really is going to help all of us, approach this, appropriately.
So you're not going to have the Inquirer build a chatbot that just answers every question like a Philly resident who's been living there for 75 years.
Maybe that's a good idea.
I would talk to that one. There you go.
There you go.
Yeah. We'll keep paying attention. So for my last question, you mentioned at the top of our conversation, when you started out in your career, taking that typing test, the men weren't asked to answer.
Yeah.
And all the way now to being the first female CEO and publisher of this brand that's been around almost as long as the Republic. What are your thoughts there? How have you seen this industry evolve for women in your career?
Well, there's no more typing tests, thank goodness. And you remember when I was at Condé Nast, when the very first female publisher was named. So, that is within my span of work history. I think it's using your platform to advance underrepresented groups and bring the equity that you hope, exists for, the young women coming up and certainly BIPOC folks who have been traditionally underrepresented in newspapers and magazines. So, first of all, it was really getting serious on writing a DEI strategy, not paying lip service, but actually writing a real strategy, staffing it properly, finding the funding to fund it properly. And now we've been at that for 3 years, with a full department. And, I'm really proud. I mean, some of our stats in 3 years, so I'm looking at, fourth quarter 2019, before I started February 2020 to, fourth quarter of this year, women across the organization went from 26% to 46%.
Wow, that's a lot of growth in not a very long time.
A lot of growth. And within the newsroom, which was actually pretty good when I started, 44% is now 47%. And of course, we'd like to get to 50%. In terms of BIPOC representation across the company, it was 22% in 2019. It's now 33%. So we are making progress there. We'd like it to go faster. Of course, we have a lot of work to do, but we are making progress. And within the newsroom, it went from 24% to 31%. So we set goals every year for representation, on the diversity part of DEI that we hold ourselves to. We report on every quarter. And then in terms of equity and inclusion, it's, pay equity study, development plans, performance and development plans, pay bands and all sorts of things that we are, looking into and implementing. And, I think that it's also using, my platform and the brand to do really important work that shines the light on various issues. So one of the things that I'm really proud of completing this year is we commissioned a year-long series looking at institutional racism from institutions started in Philly. So it was called A More Perfect Union because, Philly was the start of our country, the promise of our nation, all the great things about our nation. It was also, the first hospital, first fire station, first university, second newspaper, us, et cetera, et cetera. So, all the promise, all the greatest things about those institutions, but also some of the fault lines. And so we did a 12-month series, of course, starting with ourselves. So I hired an independent editor, Erin Haynes, who led the whole series. And then she had full carte blanche to hire whoever she wanted to do this first chapter, examining the Inquirer. She hired Wes Lowery, Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter. And, we had a tough look at us, which was the first installment. And what's very exciting about that body of work is one of the chapters called Lights, Camera, Crime, which looked at the origins of, kind of if it bleeds, it leads, newsmaking was launched in Philly and adopted across news broadcast news across the country. That's been optioned for a docuseries.
Oh, wow.
Very good chance of getting picked up. We hope it has a great director and producer attached to it already, and that we hope will get picked up for a docuseries. So, we want to start the conversation. We want to engage new audiences, and we also want to, have a larger, national conversation on some of these topics. And we think we achieve that with this body of work. So I'm really proud of that.
Yeah, I mean, and just the act of saying to those specific people, Aaron Haynes, Wesley Lowery, like, come in, do the work. We're opening up to this. I think that
we're ready, and we can't move forward until we actually acknowledge our past and where we've come from, and what we need to do going forward.
I think that's pretty remarkable. Any other thoughts you want to share just on sort of where you hope to take the Enquirer as you continue to lead?
Well, we're very focused on product. What's the best consumer experience you can have? We are a consumer-driven business. That's where the bulk of our revenue comes from. So we think a lot about what's that customer experience all the way through, where they first, maybe encounter a podcast, live blog, newsletter, what have you, all the way through that journey. And of course, that's not only your content mix, but it's your product. How good is the actual product? How good is it on the phone? What's that experience? So, and using data to really inform those decisions, and not just, well, we kind of have a gut about this. It's like, okay, let's go test it and learn and look at the data. So I think you'll see a lot of progress with us. We hope this year on our customer experience.
That is fantastic. Can't wait to see it. Lisa, thank you so much for taking the time to speak today. I'm truly inspired by the work you've done and are doing, and really can't wait to see where you and the Enquirer and Philadelphia go in the future, that we can all follow.
Thank you so much. Go Phillies.
So for our listeners, if you have any thoughts or comments, you can reach me at Rebecca@newsmediaalliance.org. And please, if you can, share the podcast with a friend or colleague. You can follow us on the major podcast apps, as well as YouTube and our website, newsmediaalliance.org. Thank you for listening to News Take, and I'll see you next time. And thank you one more time to Lisa Hughes from the Philadelphia Enquirer.
Thank you, Rebecca. This was just a pleasure.